You are listening to Nerd Best Friends, a podcast that covers the nerdy conversations you're already having, or wish you could. It's the nerdiest thing you'll do this week.
Welcome back to another episode of Nerd Best Friends. I am Annalise, and I'm here with my best friend, Rob.
Hey, it's me, Rob, your best friend, your super nerd, and your podcast host. Nerd Best Friends can be found wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe and follow us now. Support our podcast by clicking subscribe or follow on your devices, and find us on Patreon or Venmo for more support options.
This is episode 48, and we introduce a new annual episode, The 30s. Get ready to dive into the nostalgic abyss of nerd pop culture from 3 decades ago. It's a journey filled with dial-up internet, Surge Soda, and the unforgettable tunes of the 90s. Buckle up, it's our trip back to 1994.
Surge Soda!
Surge Soda, man. It was the Mountain Dew of its time. Mountain Dew before there was Mountain Dew, right?
No. Mountain Dew's been around
older?
Since like the 50s or something.
It was the Mountain Dew for the teens of the time.
It was the Mountain Dew, but it was for the youth, and it was extreme.
Completely. But first, what I like about it.
This time for what I like about it, I chose something a little bit different, and this is cookbooks. Nerdy themed cookbooks.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
There's a ton of them. So I have here handy right off my shelf is one of the Dungeons and Dragons cookbooks. It's called Heroes Feast. And I've seen at the bookstore, there's also Heroes Feast 2. They made another one. God. I know that right next to it on the shelf in the bookstore when I was looking, there was, of course, the World of Warcraft cookbook as well. I know there's a Marvel Universe one I think we have somewhere as well, where you can make like Aunt May's Johnny Cakes and things like that.
Oh my gosh.
And so, like, I get that it's just a gimmick, right? It's whatever cookbook, and they just kind of slap a label on it to sell product. Like, I get that, but it's a fun gimmick. It is one of these things where, first of all, they're beautiful, right? Any, good hardback cookbook is really kind of a coffee table book, because you can leave them out and people flip through them, and the pictures of the food are absolutely gorgeous, right, in these things.
Yes.
And so that's really fun. If you're into both food and or photography, that's cool to look at. And then it gives you, it's kind of a motivating factor too. If you're going to make a big complex recipe or something like that, you can open one of these things up. One of my favorite memories of kind of coping and overcoming things during the pandemic times was during Thanksgiving. We decided we weren't going to gather with our extended family. And so instead, just the 3 of us we were going to make a Thanksgiving for ourselves. So we did it completely non-traditional. We grabbed the Heroes Feast Dungeons and Dragons cookbook off the shelf, and we spent all day, we made a big plan. We decided to have one meal from each section. And so the way that they divide this particular one up is by the Dungeons and Dragons like species that are in there. So there's a human section, and a halfling section, and a dark elf section, and a dwarf section, and all these kinds of things. And so we went through and grabbed a recipe from each of the different sections, right? And so they're kind of clever as far as how they, divide things up. Like the elf section is all vegetarian meals, and the halfling section is a lot of like rich, buttery, fatty comfort food type things and stuff like that. So, and we had a ton of fun going through, picking out, basically went to each section and kind of marked, well, what would we eat? What would we like to cook? This, and this. And then going back through that and figuring out, okay, well, if this is going to be one big meal, what complements each other? Like, we don't want to end up with 3 dishes that all have the same ingredient or something like that, right? So we went through and looked at it. We made our plan. We did our shopping. We spent all day cooking and taking pictures and all this kind of stuff. So it was motivating, and it was just a fun way to look at it, because we had that frame of reference and just that kind of fun, where if I pick up generic cookbook number 3 off the shelf, even though it's still the same, it could have the exact same recipes in it with the exact same beautiful pictures and stuff. It might not have that frame of reference or that starter or prompt, if you will, to get that done. So I look forward to doing the same thing with the Marvel Universe one that we have, and maybe we'll make an Avengers feast or something.
There
and we'll
you
pick
go.
we'll pick the Iron Man and Thor and the whole recipes
Wow.
and put them all together, something like that.
That is super fun. I remember the Thanksgiving you said you were gonna do that instead of when we were at a time where we weren't going to other people's houses. Yeah, I have a Harry Potter one that I've cooked a few recipes from, but not like a whole meal. I mean, that sounds amazing. But you know what I saw? I was recently in my local game store, my local nerd store. There's a Castle Rock Kitchen cookbook. That's Stephen King. Our last episode, right? Like, so it's a bunch of recipes from foods that are mentioned in a bunch of his books. It's phenomenal. I don't have it yet. It's on my list, but man, again, yeah, it's a big, beautiful hardcover book with beautiful pictures inside. And then there's narrative about what book it's from and how they devised the recipe.
Cool,
because it's not like Stephen King's writing out recipes in his books, but during this family is sitting together and they're having this meal. Here's a recipe to cook it. I'm excited. You're right on with the nerd cookbooks.
Very cool. I would love to hear stories from listeners too about what nerdy cookbooks they have and if they have any fun stories about putting those recipes together, putting those feasts together.
Absolutely. That should be added to your nerd goals, to have a nerd cookbook feast. Just throwing that out there. You can add it in if you're going to do it anyways.
That's a good nerd project, is to cook from the nerd cookbooks. I love it.
How about some nerd mail?
Nerd mail.
We've heard from some TikTok followers who have noted that we've been quiet on that platform, and they are absolutely right. Thank you, followers, for calling us out on that. But we've been posting mostly on Instagram and Facebook. Part of our nerd goals for 2024 is to be a little bit more present on social media. So we're going to work on it. We promise. Stay following. But thank you for calling us out. I appreciate it. The good news is we are getting new followers almost every day on all the platforms that we post on. So the word's getting out there, and share with your friends. On to the episode, Rob. It's our new segment, The 30s.
This is great. We came up with this idea of let's take a look at what was going on 30 years ago, because 30 years ago, I was doing the calculations. So 30 years ago was 1994. Yes. We met in 1993.
Yes.
So if you had, so that's kind of the impetus of this, oh man, I wish I had thought of this a couple months earlier. We could have done it at the end of 2023. And that would have been the number one thing, was the Nerd Best Friends was born then.
Pretty much 1990. I mean, we met in 93, but yeah, we really didn't start hanging out till your sophomore year.
1994 was my freshman year of high school. So if you think about those influential pop culture things, the music, the movies, the TV shows that were on, the comic books I was reading, I mean, that's really the start of Big Nerd Rob, right? It's going to be 30 years ago in 1994.
And don't forget that the calendar year is a little bit different than the school year, right? So it would have been the spring of your freshman year, summer between your freshman and sophomore year, and fall of your sophomore year. So there's the way the calendar works, it's kind of in between our schooling years. But agree that I look back on this and go, one, I can't believe it was 30 years ago. I definitely do not feel old enough to say that. But it really got me the other day when we were playing Masks, when, I had to take a little extended break. We usually take a little break because I had to field a phone call from HR. And I'm like, yeah, the principal's job is never done. I had to take this call and, whatever. And then I said, but now I get to cut my mentality into a third of how old I am. And then the math started, oh my gosh, I'm 45 and I'm role playing a 15-year-old in high school. 30 years ago is when I was a 15-year-old. It just blew my mind the other day.
Right. So Mask is a role playing game that is it's a superhero role playing game. And the setting that we're in is a superhero high school setting, very much like a X-Men Academy or a Sky High type situation where we're at. And so, we're playing 15-year-olds, and it is it's what I'm really digging about it, on the lines of what you were just saying, is there are things about being 15. There are things about being high school that are evergreen, right? They're the same as they were 30 years ago. And then there's a lot of things that we, humorously try to interject in that are very different, right?
Yeah. It makes the game really fun, especially since it's run by your son, who's almost 15 himself. So
he is 15. He's almost 16.
Did he already turn 15?
Yeah, dude, we're driving.
How was this year? Was it 14 this year? Bro. I'm a year off. Dang, sorry, Andrew. Yeah, so
No.
it's run by your 15-year-old and us 30 years away from being 15, and yeah,
Right.
it blows my mind.
It's us
really
45-year-olds pretending we're in high school. And I mean, I feel like part of the goal of that game is just to embarrass Andrew and like make him crack up. Is how I look at it.
I like calling him out, like when we last played, and he's like, "Oh, for lunch this is." I'm like, "Andrew, what day did you have that lunch from the cafeteria?" And he's like, "Yesterday." Whether or not
100%.
that's true, I can hear him starting to incorporate his experiences. Andrew, what class did this happen in? Oh, ethnic studies. I love it. So for us as the host, 30 years ago, we were smack dab in high school, and that might not be the same for our listeners. So hopefully you enjoy this look back wherever you were in 1994, even if you weren't born yet. You can
if you weren't born yet, well, get ready. I bet you're going to, we're doing the things that were popular and that we remember. So I'd also be really interested to hear from someone who's like, hey, I'm, 20 years old and I definitely was not alive during this time, but I know those songs and I know those movies or whatever. I would be curious, or if the opposite, like, I have no idea what you guys are talking about. It was like you were speaking another language.
I had to Google something, or the most hurtful comment. Oh yeah, I remember that. My mom talked about it all the time.
Oh, 100%.
All right, so
my
let's
mom
start
plays
with
that
music.
song in the car.
Yeah, my mom. I'm named that because my mom loved that show. That's a funny tangent, by the way. Like, you can just follow name trends based on popular television shows and movies. Like, we're a few years away from having a lot of Bellas and Edwards in schools, right? Like, well, at least high schools. They're probably already in the elementary level, but there was a point in time where, like, hey, your name's Brandon, huh? Oh, did your mom watch 90210? Yeah, how did you know? Yeah. Let's start with music, the music of 1994.
It looks like you've got some bands. I chose some specific songs that I feel like take me back to that day, but let's talk about bands and we'll see if we've got some overlap.
Yeah, I went more in the general area because this was an interesting time in pop music, right? This is right in the height of the grunge era. Nirvana, Pearl Jam, groups like Soundgarden started coming out and like unfolding more, or Sublime, right? Sublime was, so this kind of grunge era is really hitting its stride. At the same time, there's this really big, in my opinion, some of the best hip hop.
An explosion of hip hop. It became like, I think it was mid 90s when it became the most popular form of music, or most bought albums and those kinds of things.
What was different about hip hop in 1994 is that we had that big emergence from like NWA and this really heavy violent rap.
Yeah.
And then rap and hip hop kind of turned. And if you listen to rap and hip hop from 1994, you have Heavy D and the Boys and talking about partying and having fun. And it's just this really unique hip hop era that's not really, it wasn't so heavy.
Right. And maybe that heavier rap kind of paved the way to say, hey, there's an audience here. This is popular, but what if we made it so that it could actually be played on the radio without a bunch of edits and things like that? And then that's where, you could hear, I see you have Boys to Men on your list. Like, you could hear a Boys to Men song on my mom's light work radio station.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. And then you had this emergence of art, or this melding of R&B and hip hop, right? Boys to Men and Vogue, and a lot of these R&B boy and girl groups suddenly were Salt and Peppa and Vogue did a song together. Boys to Men and LL Cool J did a song together. That's all starting to be born right here in 1994. So in my opinion, you have New Edition in the late 80s, and those guys, that group kind of disbands, and suddenly you get Belle Biv DeVoe, and then that starts branching off to a lot of these hip hop, this fun hip hop rap era. And it's really also starting to hit its stride in 1994. This is where we are introduced to Beck.
Right. That was one on my list. Beck's Loser came out in 1994, and I cannot think of another song that is more covered throughout the years. I feel like that song just keeps coming up every year for the last 30 years because there's a new version, a new cover, it's in a different movie, etc.
I mean, it was such a different, right? You have this hip hop and rap, and you have all this R&B, and you have, the grunge and Nirvana and Soundgarden and all these people. And then all of a sudden you get Beck, who wasn't any of those, and really started to open the door that year for more artists like him.
And is this time period really where we got like that separate kind of subbed out genre of alternative? Like, I feel like
Yes.
90s alternative was started
Yes.
kind of in this early 90s period where it's like, well, it's not quite rock and it's
Right.
not pop.
It's not quite pop. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
alternative, you know,
Yeah.
and it's something different where there's that creative space. And Beck is a perfect example of that.
Yeah. Yes.
Primus
100%.
was another one that I really liked in the 90s. It just sounded different than anything else out there.
Almost experimental, but not experimental. Yeah, and you know, you get a band like Weezer, 1994, first popular album comes out in 1994, and they're a little bit more alternative, depending on what you listen to. You wouldn't think that based off of their radio hits, because their radio hits
I was going to say, they're one
poppy.
that kind of had a handful of radio hits on each album, but if you listen to the whole album, there's a lot of interesting deep cuts in there.
And they're very nerdy, by the way. Those guys are nerds. I will say, for what it's worth, the number one hit of 1994 on the Billboard charts, Ace of Base.
That's insane, because that song sucks.
I saw the sign.
I saw the signs.
Oh, man.
Not a banger. I don't know what was going on.
Yet that's one that keeps popping up too.
Why?
Honestly, I don't know. How about like teenagers right now? One of the most popular songs at like homecoming dances is Dancing Queen by ABBA. Like, they will come filing from all corners of the bathrooms and the, like, wherever the food and drink stations are. They will come swarming to the dance floor for Dancing Queen. It's the weirdest thing. I saw The Sign as another song like that. And that might be because of Pitch Perfect. The very first Pitch Perfect,
is there a movie or something that was very popular that brought it back?
Weird. Top hit of the year is Ace of Base. What do you have on here for?
I've got 3 songs on here that when I listen to them, it takes me back to that summer of 1994, right before my sophomore year. You and me at the City College jazz camp over the summer with Chuck Woods and goofing around and just that beautiful campus and hanging out and listening like on my Walkman or on my portable radio or whatever. Yep. These songs just takes me right back. And the first one is Black Hole Sun by Soundgarden.
Oh, I love that song.
What a vibe, that song. The other one would be Basket Case by Green Day. That Dookie album had come out, I think, the year before. And Basket Case was the radio hit of that year. Just cruising around in our cars, like with that tape in there or whatever.
Yep. Basket Case was always in the tape deck.
And then the other one is Come Out and Play by The Offspring.
Oh, I haven't thought of that song in a long time.
That one was funny because it would always come out. It was just like, it was a quotable song in a way. At that time, it was the early 90s. So everyone in Southern California was playing roller hockey, and I was no exception.
Not everyone, but most.
And so, you know, we would schedule these pickup hockey games, or we'd go out to the rink and see what was going on. I coached youth hockey, this and that. And for whatever reason, when it was time to play hockey, somebody would go, come out and play. And then we would go, you gotta keep them separated. And we would, I just remember like that song for no reason except what I was doing at the time is always connected with those times of playing hockey. Like, that's a hockey song for me for some reason.
How funny. How about a song that's about absolutely nothing? That song is about nothing at all. It's about
that song? That song's about fighting in school.
It's about nothing.
Now, Black Hole Sun, that song is about nothing or everything. I don't know. I still don't understand.
It depends on how many drugs you did in the 90s, which for us as teenagers, no. 'Cause I remember that music video, right? This is a point in time where MTV kind of turned. I was a big fan of music videos when MTV started. I actually thought about being like, I don't know what it would be called, a cinematographer or someone who directs or creates music videos. That was a career. I was like, is that even a career? How do I go to school for that? I remember Black Hole Sun as being one of the last really good music videos, and then they started to turn into goop after that. It's the one where like faces are melting, and
I remember they like melt a Barbie doll all on fire in the yard, and there's like these like plastic people in this really hot like backyard swimming pool, and
it was like it was oversaturated with color and made it look like it was like 1950s, but they used like CGI at the time to make the eyes go whiter and the mouths go whiter, and I just creepy video. And I loved that video. What is that song about? I don't know. Let's move on to TV. I don't know about you, Rob, but in my research and memory, I remember a lot of pop culture television in 1994. I don't remember a lot of nerdy television.
So there was a big one, and that was Babylon 5.
Oh, Babylon 5. I forgot about that one. Okay. All right. Tell me more.
Babylon 5 came out in 1994. That was very, very heavily influenced by Star Trek, right? It's a spaceship. Sure. It's got a crew. Yes. They have military like uniforms. They go on adventures. There's a lot of politics and intrigue as far as like meeting alien races and stuff like that. And it took that Star Trek vibe and tried to do a little bit more. It was a little darker, a little grittier, where Star Trek always very purposefully made sure that the universe that they lived in was a utopian one. This was a little bit more gritty. Some things that set Babylon 5 apart was that it was, unlike syndicated TV like Star Trek, it was a full story. So it was a story that was written to be 5 seasons with a beginning and an end. And so every episode, they had that serialization that we would see later in the 90s with Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and then with things like Smallville that we've talked about before. It had that built in from the start because it knew where it was going and where it was going to end. And because of that, more like maybe a novel series, the characters were two-dimensional. They had a little bit more grit to them and world building and things like that, because they knew what they could take time to do, because it wasn't just a monster of the week type.
Right.
You know? And then it was a sci-fi show. They explored those questions, right? We always say good sci-fi is about asking those questions or looking at ourselves through the lens of the future or through an alien species that, you know, what would they think if they saw it for the first time, kind of thing. I will admit, I was not a Babylon 5 fan. It was not on my radar those high school years. I did give it a try, probably, 10 years or so later, watching it on Netflix, you know, and looking at it. And I get it. It was good, but I fell off for whatever reasons it might have been. Yeah. But Babylon 5 fans, shout out to you. 1994 was your year, I guess.
Yeah, I forgot about that because maybe I just skipped over. Maybe it just skipped over its mention in 1994. I couldn't find anything really nerdy. I will say there are some notable pop culture shows at the time. I put like Friends. I don't know I think it might be first or second season of Friends at this point. That's pretty notable, you know, pop culture. I put Roseanne, and I know she's got a problematic storyline right now, but what I will tell you, what I remember about Roseanne is growing up poor, Roseanne was the first show on television that was a popular show that millions of people watched every week, that showed a family struggling to pay their bills, right? There's scenes where Roseanne, and the character's name is Dan. I'm going to forget the actor's name, but
John Goodman.
Thank you. I was going to say John Candy, and I knew that wasn't right. Where Roseanne Barr and John Goodman are sitting at a table saying, well, if we send the check for this light bill, they're not going to get it till next week. So we'll be fine, and we can go and walk it. Like, they're having this discussion. You didn't see that on television. You didn't see that on Leave It to Beaver, right? You didn't see that.
And what a contrast with Friends that you just mentioned, right? As far as these like coastal elitists in this like beautiful New York apartment that costs $1 million a month. And, you know, it's all about, you know, being fancy and being in the big city. Completely opposite with Roseanne, right?
Exactly. And I will give credit to Friends. There is one episode where 3 of them are like, I don't think these other 3 realize that we don't make as much money as they do. And there was like this whole episode wrapped around it. So kudos to Friends who recognize it later in the series. But yeah, completely opposites. You're right. I'm also just, you know, as we are supporters of the LGBTQ community, this is the year the Ellen show debuts, which lasts 5 seasons. And its final season is the big season where Ellen as a character and a person comes out of the closet. And that's huge pop culture. But this is the first year of that show. And as the young teen female in 1994, have to mention My So-Called Life. Not a nerdy show. That's the year My So-Called Life came out and was popular. And it was one of those ones that didn't get a second season. Who knows why? But in terms of that, like, I remember those shows that impacted me. And now as we look back on 30 years, impacted pop culture a lot, but not so much nerdy, just pop.
I think shows that I was watching during this time were, I think, like Star Trek The Next Generation was wrapping up, and Star Trek, I think Deep Space Nine was the one after that. And then MacGyver, of course, was another kind of nerdy show that I was watching in the early 90s. But none of those came out in 94. They were already, you know, in their later seasons by that time.
You know what I just thought about? I'm looking it up real quick. When did The State come out? Was that 94? Yeah, 1994.
No kidding.
How did we miss that? Well, you know how we missed that, because when you do researchers say top hits of 1994, The State would not have made that list.
Right.
I had to actually look up Adam Sandler, and he wasn't a thing in 1994 because Billy Madison didn't come out to 95.
Well, we know what we're talking about next year.
Yeah, exactly.
That'll
Spoiler
definitely be on the
alert.
list. Spoiler alert. We're going to do the 30-year show every year, and it's going to be great.
Boom, boom. But yeah, The
oh
State
man,
came
The
out in
State.
1994. We were both watching that, although that's kind of one of the things that started to bridge our friendship because we didn't know we were watching. And do you remember them? I remember the moment very vividly.
Oh no.
We were in jazz band rehearsal.
Okay.
Right. And The State was on the night before. And there was a really dumb sketch of guys in the army. It's not one of the more popular sketches, but I remember it because of this moment. In the thing, there's like a sergeant giving orders. All right, everyone, we're going to do this. Me too, Sarge? Yes, you too. Me too, Sarge? And that was the whole skit. It's not one of their best. Very next day in jazz band, Mr. Garsky's like, okay, we're going to blah, 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 blah. And at the same time, me and Rusty Cummings go, me too, Sarge? And then all of a sudden you start cracking up. You're like, me too, Sarge? And I remember Dan Garsky looking around going, are you guys, what? And then just moved on without saying a word. Like, I remember the very
really
moment that really started to bridge our friendship. We realized we were both watching The State at home on MTV. The State's a sketch comedy, by the way. If you don't know, look it up. They're awesome.
And you'll recognize a lot of young versions of some of your favorite comedians and character actors in that show if you do check it out.
Well, there weren't a lot of nerdy television shows. What about films? What do you have for films in 1994?
So, yeah, it wasn't a huge year for sci-fi, but if we think about where we are with fantasy stories and kind of those nerd hobbies right now, we know that there's been a ebb and flow, but always a big interest in vampire stories. And so I will say later on, I didn't include it in the hobbies section because it wasn't something that I have a lot of information about, but Vampire of the Masquerade is a very popular like live action RPG where you have the option to like dress up and rent out buildings and play through your RPG kind of thing. Very popular. It came out in 1994 alongside a very popular movie, Interview with a Vampire, which is the one with Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt. And they're very pretty, handsome vampires, which influenced a lot of young people to think that vampires were super cool and get into that genre and create a world around it.
That was a very popular vampire movie 2 years after Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie was out and 2 years before the series is created, right smack dab in the middle of those two.
And then other movies, there were probably some what we would think of as like kind of throwaway action movies, but I definitely remember going to see them right in the theater. One was Speed with Keanu Reeves. That was one of his breakthrough hit when he was super popular in the 90s. And then another one was an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, True Lies. And that's the one with Jamie Lee Curtis, which was very, very popular at the time as well. To round off my list, I'll throw it to you because Shawshank Redemption came out in 1994.
Oh yeah. Shawshank. And, you know, we'll talk about what our next episode is. That might actually even be mentioned again next episode because it came out in 94, but it was not popular. It kind of bombed in the box office.
Maybe. Oh, if that's the case, then that's for sure a cult classic.
I was just looking up Rumble in the Bronx, but that's going to be next year's 30s episode because it was 1995. The same in terms of nerd movies. The top movie of 1994 was The Lion King, which you can say is nerdy because even though it wasn't written as a musical, these Disney movies that came out at the time absolutely were musicals. And it was like a sneaky way for America to love musicals between Beauty and the Beast and The Little Mermaid. This is The Lion King. I think that trilogy of films that came out boom, boom, boom from Disney is what really elevated it because after this is just Mulan and Hunchback of Notre Dame and they just kept going and going and going and going. And this was the Lion King.
That was the era. That's the Michael Eisner era of Disney where, that style of movie, starting with The Little Mermaid, absolutely turned the Disney animation studio around, like saved it basically and revamped it.
Totally
saved it. Juggernaut of entertainment it still is today.
It's the Howard Ashman and Alan Menken era. And Howard Ashman passes away during the making of Beauty and the Beast. I think he writes half of Aladdin, then they bring Tim Rice on to write the rest of Aladdin. And The Lion King was the question about whether or not they were going to be able to continue that success without Howard Ashman. That's what I remember. Like everyone was on the edge. Is The Lion King going to be good? And, you know, they bring on Elton John to help write the lyrics, and Lion King is the top film in 94. I put a couple of things on there depending if you're a nerd of these things. If you're a nerd of history, this is the year Forrest Gump. Big blockbuster came out. And if you've never seen Forrest Gump, one, I recommend it. But two, they used this new technology of being able to green screen and put someone in a scene that they weren't in before. And they put the character Forrest Gump throughout decades of American history as an auxiliary character. Kind of like, I mean, think about the quantum leap thing, but he's not leaping. He's living his life. So Forrest Gump is out there in 94. Pulp Fiction brings us Quentin Tarantino. And if you're a Quentin Tarantino nerd, this is really his big breakthrough hit. And Pulp Fiction is to this day still so good.
Yeah, I mean, everybody was talking about Pulp Fiction. It was so different. It was so edgy. It was so exciting, especially for high school kids. It was this kind of forbidden thing. Like, it was a very rated R movie. And so it was a little bit tricky to kind of get your hands on it and see it. I remember watching it one night. It's funny that Russ Cummings comes up a second time in this episode.
Hey, Rusty.
I watched it at his house, like late at night, maybe not too
like
late.
His parents weren't
his
home
parents were out to dinner or something, and
we
watched it there.
Yeah, it was for us as teenagers. You're absolutely correct. It was just a different way to tell stories too, and in a real gritty, violent but good way. I mean, it was it still holds up. There's a couple there's some language pieces in it. Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Big cast, just very good. And how about Ultimate Nerds? Revenge of the Nerds at this point is on like number 4 or 5, and people are kind of done with it. So you get a new kind of nerd, and the emergence of Jim Carrey with Dumb and Dumber. Now I know he did movies before and after this, but this was really Jim Carrey was on In Living Color. And actually, hold on, was In Living Color 94? Because if I missed that one too, In Living Color,
that would have come up in the research.
It started in 1990, so Jim Carrey becomes a little bit of a household name through In Living Color, and then he's in a couple of films, and then this one really breaks out. Dumb and Dumber is a widely popular movie. Those guys are nerds. You and I are, I'll say, we're big fans of Adam Sandler. Adam Sandler and Happy Madison Productions do not exist at this point in time. He is an SNL star trying to break out into movies, and 94 is when Airheads came out, and it's not a great film.
I like hilarious. Airheads. I totally like that movie.
Liking it and it being a good movie are two separate things. So I'll just say that.
It's Brendan Fraser, Adam Sandler, and Steve Buscemi.
Was it Steve Buscemi, or why am I thinking Pauly Shore?
It's not a Pauly Shore movie.
It's not. Okay.
I don't think.
Airheads cast. Brent, you're right. Steve Buscemi. You were right on. Yep. Chris Farley plays a part. Judd Nelson is in it. Michael McKean. David Arquette. There's a lot of actors in this film.
A lot of SNL type folks.
A lot of SNL. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of a Saturday Night Live movie in the early 90s.
Yeah, you're right. But man, Airheads, 1994. Did you have anything else on movies?
I was just going to say, like, it's one of those movies, like you said, it's not good, but I really like it. And so I was saying, like, what's another one like that? And it's like Ladies Man.
You quote Ladies Man all the time, and it's such a horrible film, but it's hilarious.
Another Saturday Night Live, like that. That's like what would we say? That was 10 years later. There was Airheads, and then the next generation was Ladies Man 10 years later.
I mean, there's all kinds of in between, right? I don't know what that category is actually called, but I call it dumb humor because it's around all the time. 10 years would be surprising to me, but you get all of those types of movies, and I keep going back to The State. Right, because then you get Reno 911, and you get I'm gonna blank on this film. It's a dark comedy that I love, and it's written by the guys from The State. Why can't I think of it? It's a beauty pageant with Christy Alley and Kirsten Dunst. Actually, I can't believe I'm blanking on this film. I had it on VHS and I watched it all the time.
Drop Dead Gorgeous?
Yes, thank you. Drop Dead Gorgeous is a little bit dark, but it's one of those kind of dumb, funny movies. You get Old School. You get the Will Ferrell starting to come out and make movies, Old School and Dodgeball. And to me, that's all that same era.
See, I think
same genre.
Absolutely same era. There's something that some of them get put apart. So for instance, like there are all these kind of Saturday Night Live throwaway comedy movies, but every once in a while you'll get a Ghostbusters, and every once in a while you'll get an Anchorman. And they're these movies that are like better. They're good all the way through. Kind of
transcend the SNL movie. Like Coneheads came out in 94. We didn't mention Coneheads because it flopped. It's not a good movie.
Right.
They were funny. It was a funny sketch on Saturday Night Live. Did not translate into films. Wayne's World, a couple of years earlier. Blockbuster. Transcends.
That's another interesting topic for a future show.
Saturday Night Live films.
What are those Saturday Night Live films that transcend the throwaway comedy?
It's noted and on our list of ideas.
She's got a pencil out and everything, you guys.
I'm a podcaster, bro. All right. Comic books. This was an awful year for books, too. I looked up like the
Oh, really?
New York Times bestsellers list, and it's like, oh gosh. And even Stephen King, one of my lower on the list in terms of favorites, Insomnia. It's okay. It's okay. I really have nothing here for comic books. What do you have?
Book-wise, there were at least two, maybe three really big drops in 1994. 1994, believe it or not, which I would not have guessed that this book was that old, but A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. That's the first book in the Game of Thrones series, which got hugely popular a few years ago, and everybody was watching that. I did not realize that book was almost 30 years old at the time of that show being made. So that's very interesting that I learned during the research of this. And then the other one would be The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. This is, I mean, looking at the research, 80 million copies of this book were sold in 1994. This is one of those foundational fantasy novel series turned into a dozen books long. They're all 4 inches thick. It's world building at its finest. It's a fantasy book. It's long. It's dense. It's very, very detailed to the nth degree, which some people really like. Those folks that love the tabletop hobbies that we love, but the part of it that they love is like the min-maxing and the gamifying and the meta and the damage per second and the make the perfect army list kind of people. They love this kind of book, right? It's got all the details. It's got everything you need. It is not a series that I have read because it was real long and real intimidating to me. But I do remember folks in my D&D group in high school reading these books and loving these books and having them on the shelves. There is also, I don't know what happened to it. I'm hoping it's still going, but they started a Wheel of Time TV series, I think on HBO Max. And from what I heard, it was super good. And then I think it was, that was either right before pandemic times or right before writer strike times. And I don't know if the second season ever got made. I was excited about that because I'm like, oh, finally I could get this story and figure out what the Wheel of Time is all about. There is a comic book series on it. And I started reading the comic book series and it was also really boring and dense. So I did that as well. We just slam all the nerds that love, just slam my Robert Jordan nerds on the podcast. But
I'm glad you looked them up because I saw those books and I, not being in the fantasy realm very often in terms of books and literature, I saw them and went and didn't even bother to look to see that they were nerd books. So I'm glad you looked that up.
Now, comic book wise,
yes,
we had some heavy hitters as well as far as these memorable touchstone series. First one, Death of Superman, right? Which I think we've talked about on the podcast before.
Yeah, on the Superman episode, yeah.
Superman died in 1994. Now, that story arc started in 1992, so it's kind of a cheat there, but it ended in 94, and it ended with Superman getting his head smashed in by Darkseid, and then the funeral, and the black armbands with your purchase of the comic and all this stuff. That was 1994. Another one was one of the most probably hated Spider-Man stories ever, which was the Clone Saga. The Clone Saga is from 1994 is often very much made fun of as far as comic books done wrong, as far as creators and writers leading the audience one way to pull the rug out from under them or being just confusing to the point of what am I reading here kind of thing. This is then the creation of Ben Reilly Spider-Man, right? So Ben Reilly is the Peter Parker clone who also has spider powers. You would recognize him as if you've ever seen the pictures of Spider-Man and he's wearing a hoodie. It'll be like a red Spider-Man thing. And he's got a blue hoodie on. That's Ben Reilly Spider-Man. Okay. And he was running around and it's very confusing. People of the nerd community at that time hate Ben Reilly. To this day, you put out a comic book with Ben Reilly, it's going to make controversy and people are going to hate on it. Oh, Ben Reilly with his stupid hoodie and all this stuff. So yeah, that was the Clone Saga. That came out in 94. Okay. And then another one was X-Men Age of Apocalypse. And that was a storyline that came out in 94 as well. Age of Apocalypse was one of the coolest storylines. I don't know if reading it today holds up because, comic books were a lot wordier 30 years ago. Yes, there was a lot more, now it would be a rarity to open a comic book and see a thought bubble in it. right? They're really, the art has evolved with the show not tell of the art so that you don't have to have that thought bubble of the character describing what they're doing as they're doing it. The artist can show you that now. So you'll just get those, you know, the voice bubbles. But back then, man, every page had to have a big yellow box telling you what was going on and a thought bubble from the character telling you what was going on. And a lot of times they say it out loud, what's going on. Like, so I don't know if it's an easy read anymore, but this was a super influential storyline. The X-Men cartoon of the 90s hit this one really hard in their later seasons as well. The X-Men cartoon of the 90s was awesome as far as taking these big X-Men events and making like a 4-part month-long Saturday morning cartoon story of it. And one of my favorites is Age of Apocalypse. It's the big evil bad guy alien, and he's got his 4 horsemen, and this is where Angel turns into Archangel because he gets all evilified with his big metal wings from Apocalypse magic and stuff. It's really cool and very 90s. And then this was also the storyline for the X-Men movie. Was the movie also called Age of Apocalypse?
I don't remember it being called that.
Yeah, no, X-Men Apocalypse.
Apocalypse, but not Age of. Yeah.
This was like the reboot one, right? So there was the first X-Men movies came out, and I think there were 3 or 4 of them that had, you know, it had Patrick Stewart as Professor X, and it had
yes.
Halle Berry and stuff. This is a new cast. This is when they rebooted it. They rebooted it with the Apocalypse storyline. And while it's a very comic book movie and it has comic book movie problems, it's pretty great. I guess it's a pretty fun movie. It might be my favorite X-Men movie because I love that storyline. I think Apocalypse is super dope. And I remember reading and watching the cartoon of it and stuff. Like, it was super cool.
I'm glad you did a lot of research on that one because I looked at comics and went, what? I definitely wasn't. I was reading horror comic books at this time, right? This is right about the time I got my job at McDonald's, and I would on payday, walk from McDonald's down to the Santa Barbara Bank and Trust and cash my check because I didn't have a bank account. And then I'd walk my cash back and I'd go to Metro Comics and get instead of superhero comic books, I was reading horror ones, which don't have there's none that I can say like, oh, it's this, because whatever.
You had graduated from your super racist Tintin comic books from the Bookmobile.
They're not racist. They're just French. Hey, you got to place everything in the time. Yes, I had stopped reading Adventures of Tintin and had moved to horror comics. What about hobbies? What were you doing in 1994?
I was playing Dungeons and Dragons in 1994. I was playing.
What's the other nerd game you were playing like mad in 1994?
Oh, Magic the Gathering.
Yeah. But that's
Magic the Gathering came out in 1993, but yeah, I was playing it in 1994. Like, once some of our friends in high school had gotten into it and discovered it, and then we were like, well, we got to get Magic cards, and that's where that Saturday job money started going, was the Magic card addiction. Little did we know that 30 years from now it would still be going strong. It would still be. I mean, they're selling a set every quarter and selling.
They come up with something new, and
they might still be the top moneymaker for Hasbro, right?
I wouldn't be surprised.
If not, then it's like them and Barbie and Transformers. They're up at the top. So interesting story. Tying these together, I was also playing Dungeons and Dragons. This was the era of 2nd edition Dungeons and Dragons. 3rd edition didn't come out till 2000, which is funny because 1st edition didn't last very long. Like, it came out, it gained some popularity, and right away it was like, oh, we got to like tweak these rules and make this something a little bit bigger, right? So I'm not sure how many years 1st edition lasted, but it wasn't very long. 2nd edition lasted forever. Right? Because if we're talking 1st edition coming out in 79, in 1994, I was still playing 2nd edition.
2nd edition, right.
And at that time, it was TSR was the company.
Okay.
A new company, Wizards of the Coast, created Magic the Gathering. It was so popular and made so much money that the creators of Magic the Gathering were like, you know, we are super nerds and we play Dungeons and Dragons, and we think we could do a better job, or we could make some improvements. We want to make sure Dungeons and Dragons doesn't go away. They bought Dungeons and Dragons, and Dungeons and Dragons became a Wizards of the Coast property.
Okay.
Basically was subsidized by buy Magic the Gathering. It came out with a new edition in 2000 with third edition, and all of that was paid for because Dungeons and Dragons doesn't make money. It never has, it never will. You can play Dungeons and Dragons with one $30 book for 10 years, right? It doesn't have cash flow. It doesn't have that like Magic the Gathering. Every quarter, here's 250 new cards you need to buy to be competitive in Magic the Gathering. Right. It doesn't have that built in. So it just supported Dungeons and Dragons all the way through third edition.
That's funny.
And fourth edition, when World of Warcraft was super popular, Hasbro was like, wait, this all comes from Dungeons and Dragons, right? And they're like, yeah. And they're like, and you make Magic the Gathering? Yeah, it's $1 billion a year company. Cool. We'll buy that. And Hasbro then bought Wizards of the Coast, the whole company, and put them under the umbrella. It is interesting to think that Dungeons and Dragons would be very different or maybe not even exist anymore if it wasn't for Magic the Gathering. Those guys saved it.
That's really funny. And I will say, I was thinking while you were talking about that age gap between second edition and third edition, I half wonder if TSR as a small company just didn't want to invest in continuing to update it with all of that Moms of America backlash in the 80s about D&D being demonic and it's satanic and you shouldn't play it. I imagine they probably just didn't want to. They probably had ideas throughout all those 2 decades, the 80s and 90s, but didn't have the funding or too scared to put the money into updating it.
They were still selling books and selling a ton of books. I mean, I had bookshelves full of the complete player's handbook and the complete wizard's handbook and this new addition to the monster manual and that new addition to the monster manual and this new adventure module. But it was very difficult for anyone new to get in. If you were thinking like, oh, I've heard of Dungeons and Dragons. What is it? You walk into your store. You might not have even been able to find the player's handbook. Just a bunch of these extra kind of supplements. And it's like, well, where do I start? What do I do? This is so complicated and confusing. It was just too much. It outlasted its usefulness as far as just getting too kludgy and too complicated. And I think that was a big thing. Like a new company, they're like, let's start over because we're a company and we want to sell books. So we're going to create a new edition. We're going to start over, new player's handbook, be new, player friendly, all that kind of stuff. All thanks to Magic the Gathering.
Any other hobbies that you had?
I did just note that Warhammer 40K was in its third edition in 1994. 11th edition just came out this year. Wow. So let you know how quickly that company moves with their editions. They know how to sell books and models. Every 3 years you get a new edition. I was just talking to our friend Nick yesterday. We were talking about Warhammer and he's like, man, I've got these 2 boys and they're kind of interested when they see the art and stuff. I'm thinking about getting back into it. And we're like, yeah, I remember when we used to play in college. He's like, yeah, I think that was 5th edition. I'm like, yeah, 11th just came out. Jeez.
It's time to put some money in it, Nick, if you're going to have your boys playing it. It was so funny that we are best friends and we were emerging that best friendship around this time, but I wasn't into any of that at all. I did not play D&D with you. I do remember hanging out with our friends. Just basically any break, lunch break. Occasionally we wouldn't have rehearsal in band period. So y'all would just bust out your magic cards and play. And I just sit there twiddling my thumbs, which was fine. Like I had fun watching you play, watching our friends play. And you guys are all getting all aggro about it and stuff. And we played other card games too that were just whatever card games that everyone plays when they're teens. I do remember
about that. Like we had those cards just like put together with a rubber band bouncing around in the bottom of our backpacks. Some of those cards are worth like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Oh yeah. If you had kept your collection, you would have been like, I could retire this year off of my Magic the Gathering cards from 1994. And now they could have all fancy carrying cases and all that. But I didn't do that. For me, hobbies were like reading and listening to music and watching MTV and stuff like that. But I will say one thing that really got my attention when doing some research for this episode was a side-by-side picture of hobbies stuff from 1994 and now. The picture of 1994 had a big brick of a cell phone because people didn't have cell phones. Pagers weren't even a thing. But the people who did have cell phones, it was like, $100 a minute or something like that. And they were big, giant bricks. But really, really, really wealthy people were able to use a cell phone that might be able to call a line and it just wasn't great. But people who were wealthy were with that big brick of a cell phone. I'll also say, like what we would call a laptop now, a portable computer were big, giant, talk about 4-inch books. These were like 4-inch little teeny things that might be able to do a couple things. It had a Walkman. It had a Polaroid camera. because digital cameras weren't a thing. I put on the list BlueBerry. I think I mean BlackBerry or like Palm Pilot. People had Palm Pilots, which was like
and they were
digital,
not internet connected. Like they were not
no internet connection,
cellular.
but it was,
they were just a digital
calendar book.
Yeah.
That kept your contacts, like phone numbers and addresses and your calendar, like, but no internet connection. And now all of these, and a big VHS recorder, like those big honking VHS recorders you could like to put your VHS tape in and record stuff. All of these things in this picture from 1994. And today we have a singular device that can do all of it and more than we could have ever imagined in 1994. Like the things we can do with ChatGPT and Spotify or Apple Music or YouTube, we would have never been able to even dream about.
Maps, the weather, sports scores, all the things that I used to have to like go to the pile of newspapers in my house every day to go find. Like we did it. In 1994, I was like on my knees on the carpet of our floor looking for the box score of the LA Kings game so I could see what happened, because I didn't watch it the night before, and it's not like it was DVR.
You couldn't stream it from somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
so I had to go
think about
read the
movies.
box score.
You had to open the newspaper to get what movies were playing and at what time. Right. This was even before movie phone existed. Right. Because then after that, there was, welcome to movie phone. If you know the name of the movie you'd like to watch, it was bonkers. Internet exists. The World Wide Web wasn't even called the internet at the time. The World Wide Web existed, but again, it was huge, giant room machines.
It wasn't a consumer.
It wasn't a consumer. No, it was still being messed with. So just to think that we've been alive for these 30 years as teenagers and had to do everything analog, and now we get a little annoyed when ChatGPT doesn't give us exactly what we want. Like, for me, in terms of hobbies, just the way we approach our hobbies now. I mean, we're adults. We have expendable income, which you don't have when you're 15. There's differences along those ways in terms of just maturation in life. But the things we can do now with our hobbies, I mean, people are making movies with their phones. Yeah. There are teenagers who make more money than you and I combined making content on TikTok and YouTube. Like the things that they are able to do, that I wonder what we would have done and how much fun we would have had with that had that technology been available when we were 15, when our creative juices are just flowing out of control with hormones, like just how much different it was.
Free time.
And free time, exactly. In terms of hobbies, for me, it was just that I'm kind of still do the same. I read. I like watching sports. I watch movies. I'm still really into pop culture things, but now it's just on one device. It fits in my pocket. Crazy.
Never without it.
The last little category we have here is gaming. I know you and I we're not big video gamers now. I would categorize us both as once in a while, depends on the game.
I'm lucky to have a 15-year-old in the house that likes to play video games. So I kind of get that fix by looking over his shoulder every once in a while and checking out what's out there. Yeah, no video games for me. It's all the time that I have for the last good chunk of years has been spent on my tabletop hobbies and my painting and those kinds of games. And video games just don't have a place for me right now anymore.
I do once in a while. It depends on the game. And we did get one of the newer Nintendo Switches. 2 Christmases? The newest one came out, the OLED, like 2 Christmases ago.
They changed the screen for like better blacks and less glare and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's great. And we play Mario Kart sometimes. And when you and Andrew were visiting, I showed you this Lovecraftian type game that I got that I was stuck on. And Andrew was like, there you go. And we were having fun watching it. I enjoyed it, but same. It's not as much as we used to. But in 1994, when we were going to San Marcos Lanes.
Oh, yeah.
You know what that number 1 game was?
What was it?
Street Fighter.
Oh, sure.
You know what the number 2 game was?
No.
Cruisin' USA.
Dude, I love me some Cruisin' USA.
We put so much money into Cruisin' USA in 1994. Oh my gosh. Those were the 2 popular arcade games. And I will note, Street Fighter was so popular, there were different versions of it on the top list of games for 1994. And that was the year the Street Fighter movie came out. It was so popular. So Street Fighter was the thing in 1994.
So the other video game, like the other arcade game that I had on my list was Tekken. I don't remember if you remember Tekken.
I remember Tekken.
But it was like a different kind of Street Fighter, right? It just had a different art style and it had different archetypes. And I remember thinking it was super cool. Like, I remember thinking like, oh, wow, this is way cooler than Street Fighter. Look at this new thing you could be. And I loved the drunken master, like martial artist guy. And he was so hard to play, but I loved playing him because he was so funky and all moving around. Just it was that updated, like, look what we can do with Street Fighter now with these kinds of graphics and controls game that I remember about it.
But Street Fighter outlasted it. It's 100%. Crazy.
Street Fighter's still going strong.
Mm-hmm. I put some stuff on devices in terms of gaming. If we just place ourselves in 1994, I think the quote I saw is year of the cartridge. Is what it is, but you have the Super Nintendo system, which is where instead of the cartridge it on top and it was smaller and the graphics were better. The Sony PlayStation debuts in 1994.
And that was the first one that ran on a CD, right? Not a cartridge.
First one that ran on a CD, and it was a big deal. And it really signals the end of the Sega Genesis. For years, since the 80s, it was Nintendo or Sega, or Sega. And that was the big battle. And the Genesis, Sega really just disappears very quickly after Sony releases the PlayStation. Sony comes and just changes the culture big time for gaming.
I did not have a Sega. I had a Super Nintendo. And so
we had Super Nintendo,
the games that came out in 94 that I remember was Donkey Kong Country, which people love. I didn't understand. I was like, oh yeah, well, there was a Donkey Kong game, but now there's like a Donkey Kong family and whatever. No. There's Donkey Kong lore now. I mean, because of this game and like Donkey Kong Jr. just took off into this whole other universe of Donkey Kongness. And I think that started there because it went from, Donkey Kong was nothing. It was an ape throwing barrels down stairways, but Donkey Kong Country opened up the universe. That is the DKU. The other one.
That's funny. Got me. DKU. All right, go on.
The other one was Final Fantasy VI. And yeah. I remember, I mean, Final Fantasy IV was probably my favorite RPG. I think we've had segments on the show talking about RPG video games before and really hitting Final Fantasy. Those Final Fantasy games were super cool. Yeah. I don't think I played Final Fantasy VI, but man, did I spend a lot of time sitting on the floor on the carpet in Randall Glenn's bedroom watching him play it and how cool I thought the graphics were and all that kind of stuff as it had advanced from what I was used to. The other one I mentioned was something that I had never heard of before, but I did want to make note that 1994 was the year of a PC game called Warcraft: Orcs and Humans.
Yes.
And this was like a progenitor to what would become World of Warcraft.
Yes.
The most popular out of control video game that ever lived. So that's where it got its start.
Right on. I will also say, even though the Super Nintendo did not come out in 1994, it was largely the most popular console in America. Do you remember why? Do you remember the big deal about Super Nintendo and the change of those cartridges?
It had a different cartridge. It had a top loading cartridge, right?
Mm-hmm.
No, it was different about them.
The big deal was those cartridges that were top loading had 4 slots in which you could save your game.
Of course. Yes.
So think about that. If you are a younger listener, if you are a millennial listener, we used to have to play video games and pause it to go eat dinner or go do our chores or do homework and hope that the Nintendo didn't overheat and putz out because you would have lost your progress.
Right.
And then
you always had to start back at the beginning.
Yeah. Or video games started to, those original Nintendo games started to have little codes. When you made it, you had to have your pencil and paper nearby. I still do doing my podcast. You had to have your pencil and paper nearby to be like level 7 code, and you'd write down that code after you beat that level so that the next time you turn the video game on, you can input that code and start where you left off. And then you get to Super Nintendo, which all of a sudden you could save 4 games, but it wasn't on the console. It was in the cartridge.
It was on the cartridge.
So if that cartridge got ruined, your save progress was over. If you were like me and had multiple siblings, and then you'd get so mad because someone would override your saved game, like, what did you do? No! That was the thing in 1994. That's where we were. That just triggered a whole lot of memories for me when I saw that fact.
I remember that brings up a memory for me as well as my dad was committed to beating Super Mario Brothers.
Oh,
and
yes.
This was, we didn't have YouTube videos to tell us that you could speed run it and go here to warp this and skip this level like this. We're just playing it. And you had to start from the beginning every stinking time. Mm-hmm. And I remember him playing and he was gotten pretty far. And I was like, oh, I want to stay up and see if dad could do it. And I was like, no, he's, go to bed because more likely than not, the same thing's going to happen that happened last night and he's going to fall in the lava or whatever. But he did. He beat it. I remember waking up the next morning and he's like, guess what? I beat Super Mario Brothers. I'm like, you did? Oh my
I can't believe I missed it.
And he never played it again.
Oh, no. Nope. No.
Why would you? But it was hard. It took hours.
You found the princess.
Hours to beat that game back in the day.
Yeah. And again, you had to like pause it, or you had to like, you're at a level that hasn't started yet and you leave it on and you hope that like nothing bumps into that reset button or the plug doesn't come unplugged, or you get up and go to the bathroom and come back and go outside. I remember constantly touching the top of it going, are you overheating? Are you overheating? No, you're okay. Like, I know some of our friends would pause a game and try to hope that it was still running when they got back home after school.
Yep.
Oh gosh, I'm so glad we don't have to do that anymore.
Yep. Now look at what we've got. We got these like sandbox open world games where you can do anything. Crazy.
Amazing. Hey nerds, if there's anything we missed from 1994, write to us, find us, text us, slide into our DMs, do whatever you need to do. Tell us what we missed about 1994 and the favorite things that you either experienced or you read about because you looked them up after our episode.
That was a fun little trip down memory lane, and I am looking forward to doing it again next season because I think this is really cool.
Next season's going to be fun. It's good times.
It's that time. What's the nerdiest thing you did this week?
You know, I didn't have a very nerdy week. So what I'm going to say is when we're recording, we're right towards the end of January. We're right in the middle of playoff football. And of course, I'm super invested in it because the team I've been following since the 80s, the San Francisco 49ers, are having a great season and are in the playoffs and heading to the NFC championships as of record date. You and people that you play fantasy football with, which I don't play fantasy football, and I think I can't remember, but I might have told you the number one reason why is I'm so superstitious that I can't not pick my team and I can't not pick my players. And it's just not how you do fantasy football. Right. So I stay away from it.
Place, right.
Yeah. I stay away from it because I will always superstitiously pick my teams. You invited me into a playoff. What is
the bracket challenge?
Yeah, the bracket challenge on ESPN. And as of today, I oddly have not lost a game, and I'm going to knock on wood.
Yeah, I was going to say, you brought this up because you're smoking us and you're going to win is why.
I'm bringing it up because I've been obsessed with it, waiting, like, how is this a thing? Because we have a little chat group, and even in the chat group, Maria's like, analytics really let me down. And like, I know Adam just researches. I know you two talk about it and text about it all the time. I went on instinct.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm like, well, let's see. The Bucks are having a better season. The Eagles were really on a downslide, and I hate the Eagles, so I'm going to choose the Bucks. And like, that's how I made my choices.
Honestly, if fantasy football has taught me anything, it's that you should never gamble on sports, because I'll look at everything I can think of. I'll weigh all the options. I'll look at the experts. I looked at history of when the teams played each other last. I looked at who's the home team, who are the cold weather teams. I looked at the key injuries. I looked at their records. I looked at all this stuff. I made a huge spreadsheet and color coded it, and it did nothing for me. I'm not going to win.
And I'm calling it nerdy just because now I'm doing all of that, which I didn't do before. But I don't think even if I'd done that before, I would have changed my answers because I can't not pick the 49ers. And I remember texting that to you, like, I'm the best mark to take my $20 because I have to pick the Niners to win, no matter what that path looks like. And actually, the bracket, because we each got to do 2 brackets, the bracket that's 100% as of right now was my B bracket. It was the one where I'm going to go a little wonky on this one.
There you go.
So I've been nerdy, but I love football anyways. I've always have. My whole family's all Raiders fans. I somehow took to the 49ers. I can't really find an impetus for when that happened, but I'm learning now that a lot of my family that lived in Fresno when I was growing up, they're 49ers fans.
Oh,
I probably
sure, that
heard
makes
it from
sense.
them. And also I remember watching Joe Montana, whereas the Raiders games were boring and they showed more fighting in the stands than they did the game
Yeah.
when they used to be in the Coliseum in the 80s. And I don't, something grabbed me about the 49ers. So I'm always nerdy this time of year and superstitious. And I have I have to have this certain lunch on game days and I have to wear this certain
I
thing.
didn't
And
know
here's
that.
when I had it. Oh yeah. I'm so superstitious. That's actually kind of been a lifelong secret how superstitious I like. There's no shaving on game days. Like there's a lot. There's a lot.
Let's put sports on our
episode
30-year
ideas?
retrospect for next year.
Oh, yeah. What was happening 30 years ago in sports? That's a good one. That's a good one. Maybe let's do that for the newsletter this time.
Oh, good idea.
But that's the nerdiest thing I did this week was obsess over football and trying to help
I'm
my team
glad
get
you're
to the
in
Super
because
Bowl.
I've been nerding out about football for the last couple seasons doing the stupid fantasy football thing, and I'm glad you're in it. It makes it fun to watch the games. It makes
does.
it like
It does.
you get another text group that you can like talk crap in and stuff.
Mhm.
So I think it's real fun. I'm glad you're doing it.
Well, I was so
even though you get to
superstitious,
steal all our money.
I don't know about that. I we'll see. There's still plenty of points to be had on these later games. So that's what I remember the last time I did a bracket like this was one for football and one for March Madness when I was a few years out of college. And I didn't always do it. I did the same thing. I just kind of went on instinct. Oh, I like this mascot more. So I'm going to choose this one for the March Madness. And I won one once because I chose some crazy upset national champion. I like zeroed out most of my bracket, but that last championship game is worth so much that I went from last place to first place because nobody else picked this team to win. So that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know that it's over yet just because I haven't lost a game. Yeah, it makes it more fun and a little bit more exciting. I like sports betting. I only did it when I lived in Vegas, like on small, like $5 bets. I never did it for fun. I did it for this very purpose. Like some of those prop bets, like a safety is going to be the first thing scored. Oh, I'm going to put $5 on that. That's kind of fun. Those kind of bets are fun. And I did it. And you're right. It makes it, there's another layer to watching the games.
It's given us like this little community of like something to talk about for the next couple of weeks on the weekends. Right. So I like that because again, one of my goals is to keep connecting around games and stuff like I like to do. And this is another way to do that. Tangent. Have you seen these platforms? And they're like AI platforms for arbitrage betting. Get this. So there's all these different gambling, like sports gambling platforms that are digital, right? Like these online betting places. There's DraftKings, there's MGM, whatever. There's a dozen of them, let's say. Yeah. So these tools, you subscribe to this service and AI like scans them all the time and finds out where they have opposites. So they'll look at like, oh, MGM has the Lakers 3-1 to win against the Pistons, but DraftKings has the Pistons to win 2-1 over the Lakers. And what it's saying is it matches those up. And then you bet on both. Because knowing you're going to lose one, but you're going to win one. It finds those opposites. So no matter what, you're going to make money. Arbitrage betting.
That's crazy.
I know. I want to get into it, but I know it's going to be another time sink.
I can't imagine all the time that would take to continually seek those out because Vegas, they change the odds all the time.
Right.
So
you have
got
to
get in
at
that right moment.
Exactly. So that's the other thing is like, so these platforms are expensive too. Like the one I was leaning towards, I think it's called Odds Jam because it's very professional. It'll give you alerts when it finds them, but you got to go do it before those odds change. Right. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe it would have been fun. Like when I had summers off. Also, they're expensive. It's like $80 a month for the service, which if you're using it all the time, you could cover that no problem.
Is easy. Yeah.
But I'm like, I would have to like every day be on top of this. And I don't think I can do it.
I never did in Vegas, but I think it would be fun to be in Vegas for like a Super Bowl and pay to go to like a Super Bowl party in which you're just looking at those prop bets because they continually add them throughout the game. And you're just putting a few dollars like,
so you can sit in the sports book and just keep doing them as the game's going on, as long as you're ahead of the event.
Yeah, they would do big Super Bowl parties. You had to like buy a ticket, but it's all you can eat food over here. And you're in the sports book and it's just rowdy. And you've got people who are fans of the teams that are in Super Bowl, but then you got people just doing this constant prop betting. Like that just sounds like fun. I actually did see an app about prop bets, like over or under. That's going to be the only thing you have to decide. So are the Lakers going to score over or under 102 points? Like they're making betting really interesting, but I'm not going to get into it. Well, I'm not going to get me an app.
If you could think of something something fun to gamify it like that. I did convince Maria we could do a Super Bowl party with our group, with our playoff bracket group. So for the last game to see who gets the big win, we could all get together. If you want to make the drive down, we'll, all
right. I will look stuff up.
But I would love to gamify it that way, or like do a little like, you know,
like
they have
a bingo
the box
card or
brackets,
something.
the kind of bingo card thing, or if we have those prop bets and we can all like put them in ahead of time.
Throw in quarters or something. Yeah.
Sure. Dollars. Yeah. That'd be really
that's
fun.
A good idea. That's fun. What about you though, Rob? What's the nerdiest thing you did this week?
So I had to travel for work since the last episode, just go out of town and take some professional development classes and stuff. And I was like, well, what am I going to do? Like, maybe I'll go hit up a restaurant, or maybe I'll go see what the city's got and this kind of thing. And I was like, no, I'm tired and I need to go to bed early so I could be on time for this thing that I'm traveling for and all that stuff. So I brought a box of plastic miniatures and
snap.
And I spent my evenings sitting at the little hotel desk in the hotel room under the little lamp there with my X-Acto knife and my nippers and my super glue. And I built a ton of models.
Oh my God. Did you drive? Was it when you could drive too?
Yes.
Because that changes the game a little, right?
Absolutely. Like if you have to fly, you're not going to build that stuff. But I put everything in the box and I came home with a bunch of assembled stuff, and and that hotel room was just full of like those little tiny pieces of plastic from like the nippers and like X-Acto knife cleaning it. Like the carpet was just covered. Like, I don't know what that housekeeping service was going to think when they came in. They're like, what is this stuff? But
I hope you left them a tip. That is pretty nerdy. And you got the nerdy work conference too. So like you were double nerd.
Yeah. It was pretty funny. And I've done that before. I've definitely had, especially if I have deadlines coming up and I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to paint these. I got to finish this, whatever, for a game that's coming up. But also I'm going to be in Palm Springs for a week. Did I spend my time out downtown Palm Springs partying? Nope. I was in that hotel room, dry brushing 3D printed terrain or whatever.
How funny.
Super nerdy.
Hey everyone, grab your popcorn. Next episode, we are diving into the world of cult classic films. We'll explore those unforgettable movies that have won our hearts in unconventional ways. We'll celebrate the movies that have defied expectations and become timeless in their own right. If you want to keep up to date on Nerd Best Friends, hit that subscribe or follow button now. Oh, I didn't even get to that, by the way, on my nerdiest thing I did this week.
Yeah. What'd you do?
Because you had sent some links about moving our podcast to another hosting site.
Oh, yeah.
Because since Spotify took over Anchor, it's crazy how bad our analytics are right now when we were gaining so much momentum last season.
Right.
And the only thing that has changed, we're more awesome.
If anything, we got better.
Awesome. Yeah. And we're present on our social media, like we're doing all the things, but suddenly our analytics are down. And I think we had a listener tell us like Spotify wasn't sending them the top episode or the newest
Spotify
episode of the week.
Super funky. Like,
yeah. So I've been searching that. But anyways, hit that subscribe or follow button now. That is the best way on your device that you'll get the newest content and episodes from us. We appreciate our fans, especially the ones that share our podcast with others and give us that 5-star rating wherever they get their podcasts. We are at Nerd Best Friends on social medias, and you can send us a message through podcast@nerdbestfriends.com. These are the best and easiest ways to grow our nerd family. So go do it.
This was a new idea, right? The 30-year retrospective for the year. And I'd like to keep doing it. I thought it was fun. So we definitely want that feedback of like, oh yeah, that was fun to remember all those things. Or I don't know what you guys were talking about. What a waste of an episode. I don't want to hear about this.
I stopped listening after. I fast forwarded to the nerdiest thing you did this week.
Right. I'd love to know.
Until next episode.
Thanks for listening. Nerd mail.
There you go.
Can you hear any background noise? Andrew's tap dancing in the living room.
What is he tap dancing for?
Anything goes.